Maybe it was the bucket hats, maybe it was the moustaches, but I'm convinced that runners in 1974 were faster than they are today. And I'm not talking about the superhuman runners who keep breaking world records and pushing the limits of human endurance. I'm talking about the average, ordinary, everyday, recreational runner with jobs and families. In my mind, runners today are much slower than they were in 1974. In this video, Lindsey and I are going to break down why that is and what you can do to become a better runner. So Lindsey, the first big thing, I think the difference between us and guys in 1974 is, I think our lifestyles today, we don't move around as much as folks did in 1974.
Absolutely. I mean, there's just so many more options around TV, sitting down on a couch, at work, much cushier jobs, sitting behind laptops and computers for long periods of time, and of course, the traffic, the commute to work. So we spend a ton of time sitting in our cars, driving to and from work, and often that was time where people commuted on a bicycle or walking to work or lived close to work, but they certainly spent a lot less time physically in a motor car going to and from work.
What does that mean for your running at the end of the day?
Well, if you are more sedentary, you're burning less calories, you're spending less time on your feet, your soft tissue is going to be softer, not as strong, you're more susceptible to picking up injuries, you're less hardy, probably also a little less mentally tough. And I think to kind of drive that point home and highlight it, we guys like Gebre Selassie over the years, it keeps coming up in their story how when they were 5 years old, they used to do these enormous tracks to school and back. And many of these like superhuman runners always talk about how actually walking to school and back was boring, so they used to run. And I think the point there is that if your activities of daily living are more active, you are going to be more generally fit and more generally strong than if you're spending a lot of time sitting at a desk or sitting in a car.
Lindsey, could it be as well that back in 1974 there were a lot fewer people running? Maybe it's just that there's more of us running that is bringing the average down.
It definitely plays a role, and it's not just that there were fewer people running in 1974. We know through the 80s and 90s there was a massive explosion in marathon running. So the total volume of people absolutely has increased. But in the 1970s, really only good runners ran. And a lot of that comes down to the equipment, running shoes. So as we moved into the 80s and 90s and marathon running exploded and became more popular, part of that was getting more cushioned shoes, which allowed people with poorer running mechanics to be able to also run. So effectively in 1974, we were running in slippers, or not we. They were running in slippers, and therefore you had to be quite biomechanically sound to be able to train for and endure a marathon in the types of shoes that they had available.
Lindsey, in my mind as well, the food has changed a hell of a lot. The food that we eat has changed a hell of a lot since 1974. And I mean, there's been this massive explosion of obesity, and I mean, I've struggled with my weight, and I think a lot of it has got to do with the sedentary lifestyles we lead, but also the food that we put into our bodies.
Yes, Brad, you're right. I mean, essentially what we have now is this huge availability of food and processed food. You can pretty much get hundreds of calories in a box or in a tin. So we can consume an enormous number of calories in a small amount of food, whereas in the 1970s, people tended to eat at home more. They prepared their meals more. Moms and dads took more care in what they were feeding their children. And so it's really just a case of convenience and the convenience of high sugar foods that has led to a scenario where we have this not just weight issue, but really high cholesterol, hypertension, and lifestyle diseases, which obviously compromise our ability to perform anywhere near our best, never mind to remain healthy.
Lindsey, we spoke about sort of the sitting behind desks, but I want to go back to that because I get the feeling that if you look at the way the jobs have changed over time, it's become a lot more tech-centric, and people are sitting behind desks, behind computers. But in the 1970s, there were a lot more people doing physical labor, and that also must have played a part in it.
Look, it play a huge role. So, I mean, if you are physically active at work and in your workspace, then obviously you're going to burn more calories. If you burn more calories, you're going to be stronger, you're going to be healthier. But even an accountant. Let's take out an accountant. In 1974, if you wanted information from someone else in the office, you got up, you maybe had to walk up some flights of stairs or down some flights of stairs. Maybe you had an elevator, but the point is you had to actually physically get up, go and fetch information. Then through the 80s, you probably had an internal intercom system or PBX or whatever you used to call it. But now when we move into the 2000s, it's either a WhatsApp or it's an email. You literally don't have to stand up to get anything. You don't even have to stand up to go to a meeting. You just dial in on Zoom and you can talk to someone in the same building or in a building down the road. So there was absolutely more people doing physical tasks at work, but even the people in so-called sedentary jobs were moving more than we move today.
And Lindsey, that even goes a step further. I mean, if you take it into our houses today, like you could literally push a button and somebody will bring you groceries. Or you can get a remote control vacuum cleaner. Whereas in 1974, if you needed to do housework, it was you, and you were doing the vacuuming. And it's just, our lives have become so much easier, and that's having a massive impact on our running too, isn't it?
Convenience. It's going back to the food. It's the convenience. Things are so convenient, so easy, and they require so little of our energy to get them done that it means that outside of running, we are just doing less.
So how do we become better runners like they were in 1974? And your dad's a great example. I mean, you've told me stories, I've heard stories from him of the group that he used to run in, the times they used to run, and I see some of the names of the runners he used to run with. They were all really good runners. I mean, they used to run sub 3-hour marathons for fun. How do we take the world we're living in now and make ourselves better runners?
So one of the interesting things is that we are moving away from this need for everyone to go to work. So that should be cutting down on our commute times. And so that should also mean that we should be able to create these group dynamics, create a little bit more time to spend on our training. We need to be much more conscious about what we are putting into our bodies. We provide the energy we need for energy, plus we provide the right nutrients we need to recover from exercise and to build on and improve on those so that we can become fitter, faster, and stronger. And then the final piece of that puzzle is that because we are spending a lot less time being physically active, we have to proactively work on our strength. So that means consciously getting onto a strength training plan and complementing the training that we're doing by making sure that we're getting the strength training we need. And I think if we can combine those elements, we really can get back to the point where we can compete with our parents in 1974. There is no doubt that in 1974, runners had their unique advantages. While we can't turn back the clock, we can certainly take away valuable insights and adjust the way that we train going forwards. The question though is, how do you make those adjustments? Grab your spot in our web class for runners over 50 by clicking on the link on screen now. In this class, I'll show you exactly how to do it so that you recover from sessions faster, so that you don't feel fatigued or tired all the time. I'll also show you how to avoid getting injured so that you can run faster into your 50s, 60s, and beyond.